Again, we're looking at John chapter 12, and this morning we're just going to look at the first few verses. We're not going to look at all 11 verses, at least in depth this morning. But next time I preach, I believe it'll be kind of early March. We'll, Lord willing, finish up this passage. So John 12, beginning in verse 1. Now, I'd like you to imagine with me today that you are planning to take a trip to Rome, Italy. All right, let's say you're ready to spend over $1,000 on plane tickets. Because of your trip, you are going to buy brand new luggage. You're going to buy some new clothes because, what's vacation if you're just wearing your old clothes, right? You're going to buy a new camera so you can take amazing pictures. And you are planning out all the different sites that you are going to see. So let's say that your time of your trip finally arrives and you get on the plane and you are flying out to Europe to land in Rome, Italy. So you make it to the airport in Italy. You get in a taxi, and the taxi takes you to your hotel. So you're really excited. You're going to start your amazing trip and travel through Rome and maybe the surrounding area to see all these really cool sites that are thousands of years old and all sorts of things. And so you get to your room, and you're tired, and you think, I'm just going to sit here for a little bit, maybe lean up against the back of the bed and just watch some TV for a little bit. So you turn on the TV, and you become completely fixated on the Italian Weather Channel. You've never seen anything like it. It's nothing like the Weather Channel in the United States, you think. And you think, that's amazing, so you flip the channel, you find another channel on Italian TV, and again, you don't speak any Italian. You don't understand anything that they are saying. But you just become so fixated on Italian TV that you just can't get enough of it. So for the next week, you never leave your hotel room. You just order room service and you watch Italian TV. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem is that you spent all this money to see Rome, Italy, and you never even left your hotel room. Now, sometimes Christians treat the Christian life the same way. We can get caught up in certain things that aren't bad. It's not bad to, sit in a hotel room and watch Italian TV, assuming that it's decent stuff that you're watching. But there are so many more amazing things that we could be doing and that we are missing out on. So as we look at this passage here about Jesus coming back to Bethany, there in Judea, just a stone's throw away from Jerusalem, not far from Jerusalem at all, we get a few glimpses through Mary, through Martha, and through Jesus about what Christianity should be all about. And we also get a glimpse through Judas Iscariot, and that we won't look too much at him today, about what Christianity should not be about, but sometimes is about. So I'd like you now to look with me at verses 1 through 2. We're just going to look at the first part of verse 2 here to start out with. So John chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. And I'm going to pause there for the moment. So as we look at this passage here, we're reminded again what Jesus had just recently done in the town of Bethany. All right, you think of chapter 11 and all that happened in chapter 11 where Lazarus died. He was dead for a few days, and then Jesus finally comes to heal Lazarus, but of course he knew that Lazarus was already dead. And to the astonishment of everyone, he raises Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus stumbles out of the tomb after they open the door, and Jesus calls for him to come out. They unbind him from the bandages, the wrappings, and they let him go. And after that, not only is Lazarus alive and there's great joy, but there is also great hatred and anger towards Jesus because the religious leaders and those who follow him recognize that Jesus is taking away their power, their authority, their popularity. And at that point, they become even more serious about trying to get rid of Jesus. Jesus is a threat to them. They have to kill him. And they start making plans about how they can do this. And they think, well, not during the Passover, because that could be bad, but let's see if we can still get rid of him. So Passover is coming, and people are traveling to Jerusalem to celebrate this once-a-year feast of God delivering the Israelites from slavery in the land of Egypt. And as people are coming, what is the main topic of conversation? Where's Jesus? Is Jesus going to come? What is he going to do? What do you think? I don't know. What do you think? And that's what they're all talking about is Jesus coming and what's going to happen? Because the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so they might arrest him. And that is how chapter 11 ends. So now we're in chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, guess what? Jesus is coming to Jerusalem, where everyone else is coming and where his greatest enemies are as well. Now he comes to Bethany, again, just very close to Jerusalem. He likely stayed there several times, great friends with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And we see here that 6 days before Passover, he comes. Now, why does John mention 6 days before Passover? Why is that significant? Well, it's significant, first of all, because John is always purposeful in every comment he makes. You know how sometimes we'll make a little side comment here and there, and we just say it because we feel like we need to say something, not because it's really important that we say it. Well, John might make side comments, but it's not trying to fill space at all. It means something. It's important for the story. It's important for the passage, for what the Holy Spirit is teaching through him. So he mentions that Passover is 6 days away, and he does this because why is there even a Passover to begin with? It is because it is pointing to the one who would redeem not only the Israelites from their sin and the curse, but also the whole world from their sin and from the curse as well. So even though Passover pointed back to what God did in delivering the Israelites from slavery, that wasn't the main thing of Passover. That all was a picture of what Jesus would one day do as the perfect sacrificial lamb to redeem his people and the world from sin and the curse. And so we see here that Jesus comes to Jerusalem area because he is getting ready to be the Passover lamb at that time. That's why John says this. Because as you're reading this passage, you should think, okay, Jesus' death is just a few days away. You could say 5 or 6, depending on the chronology of how that actually worked out. Jesus died at the Passover celebration, maybe not on, depending on which day scholars believe they officially celebrated Passover, but we can safely say that Jesus died at the time of Passover here. So he says this, John says this, to draw attention to the fact that Jesus' death is right around the corner. So while that hasn't happened yet, and most of the people at the feast were not thinking this, Jesus meant for the feast to celebrate not only his powerful act of healing Lazarus, but also the most powerful act of salvation that would happen in just a few days. So while they weren't celebrating Passover on this day, they were still celebrating. They were still having a dinner. They were having a feast, as it says in verse 2. So they gave a dinner for him there. Why do you think they gave Jesus a dinner? Again, because of the amazing thing that Jesus had just done for Lazarus, but also part of the plan, and it seems Mary was definitely thinking this, was because of what Jesus was about to do in just a few days' time. So Jesus came to Bethany, and we know just from studying the book of John that it was a great risk for him to come to Bethany, because again, that's very close to Jerusalem where all his enemies are. But at this time, it was Jesus' time. The risk would then prove fatal to Jesus. So it was his time to be put under these very risky circumstances, because they would lead to his crucifixion, death, burial, resurrection. So it was the time of Jesus to fully accomplish his Father's will. Now again, Jesus had recently raised Lazarus from the dead. And we see that story is is directly connected to the next few chapters and ultimately the rest of the book of John, the second half, if you will, of the book of John. The resurrection of Lazarus is a picture of Jesus' resurrection and how Jesus would also be rescued from the claws of death so that he could bring salvation to the entire world. So this is all very intentional. It's all connected. And we see here that as we look at this story, there are a few important themes that we can see during this time where he's traveled to Bethany. One of them is the threat on Jesus' life. So just imagine if you travel somewhere knowing that when you go there, your enemies are there, they're going to arrest you, they're going to kill you. Would you travel there? Of course, yeah, I mean, exactly. You know, we would say, no, I'm not going there. But it was Jesus' mission to go through that. So even though it was going to be painful, horrible, the worst thing ever that anyone could ever experience, Jesus still made the trip. So that was something definitely on his mind. His coming death as the Passover lamb was on his mind. And then his resurrection, future resurrection, was also on his mind. So the people of Bethany made a dinner for Jesus. As we know in the book of Matthew, this wasn't Lazarus' house, likely. But they were all invited to this celebration. Since there were a number of people invited, they'd probably need to have it at someone who had a bigger house, someone's house that was bigger than other people's. So that's probably part of the situation here. And again, likely celebrating his powerful act of resurrecting Lazarus from the dead. So the first thing we see here today is that Christianity means celebrating what Christ has done. Now, Christ, in this passage, had not done it yet, right? But they were, in a sense, celebrating what he would do. And we, 2,000 years later, look at this passage and say, we also should celebrate, but celebrate because we know Jesus has already accomplished it for us. He has accomplished, he's brought us salvation by his precious blood. Now, for those of you here today who have watched the Lord of the Rings movies, came out several years ago, you might remember the second one. My favorite one is the second one, The Two Towers. And towards the end of that movie, you see that the evil forces were defeated. And then the beginning of the third movie, you will see that they have a celebration feast. They're all joining together, celebrating their victory over the evil wizard at that time. Now, as I think about that scene where they're all celebrating their victory and enjoying their time together, I can't help but think of what is coming up in the rest of the third movie. So even though they were celebrating a victory, as they were celebrating, a very clear realization was that even though they won a battle, the war was not over. In fact, for them, the worst fighting was still to come. And while Jesus may have thought that some as well, because he won this amazing victory through the resurrection of Lazarus, there was going to be the worst part of the fighting for him yet to come through his death on the cross. Now, in our case, we can celebrate the victory that Jesus Christ has won for us. All right, we don't have to look forward and think, oh, it's going to be a lot worse. No, it's actually better. When we look at the future, everything is going to be better because we will be with Jesus. But there's still going to be many challenges that we will face. Victory, yes, victory, if you have trusted in Jesus Christ, victory is assured. And we should live out our lives celebrating that victory because Jesus won the victory for us. When should we celebrate? Just on Sundays? Just on Easter? No, we should celebrate every day. We should celebrate more than once a day. We should celebrate when we wake up. Think about, praise God for all the gifts he's given us and the salvation that we have through Jesus. Celebrate throughout the day. If you're like me, you're very wrapped up in the responsibilities of the day and you're very focused and in the zone, but occasionally we need to break out of that zone and remember and thank God again for the salvation that we have in Jesus. Celebrate when we are closing our eyes to go to sleep. Again, preaching the gospel to ourselves of the good news that has transformed our lives. We should celebrate silently in our hearts whenever that's appropriate. We should celebrate vocally as we gather together for worship and as we share our lives with others. Our lives should be characterized by celebrating what Jesus has done for us, celebrating Him. And so I'll just ask you, how often do you do this? How often do you think about the wonderful things that Jesus has done for you and the salvation that you have in Him? Is that something that you do at least every day? Do you do it multiple times a day? Do you do it once a week? Once a month? Do you hardly ever do it? All right, if you are a believer, this should be a regular part of your life, and that is celebrating, reflecting on, meditating on, rejoicing over the good news of Jesus Christ and what He's done for us. Christianity means celebrating what Christ has done by His death, burial, resurrection. Now, as we celebrate, we must also strengthen ourselves through that celebration because the war is not over. We all will face many more battles, even though Christ has won the victory. And we will need to continually, day after day, strap on the armor of God. And as we're strapping it on, celebrate over every piece that we put on. The helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth. Those are all amazing things that as we put it on to defend ourselves for the battles that we're going to face that day or that minute, we can also thank God that we can put on every single piece of that armor because Christ has given it to us. Christianity means celebrating what Christ has done. And the next thing we'll see here today is Christianity means serving Christ sacrificially. Christianity means serving Christ sacrificially. Look with me now, if you would, at verses 2 and 3. Verse 2 again begins, "So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume." Christianity means serving Christ sacrificially. Amen. Now, when you look at this passage, you see Martha. What is Martha doing? Martha is doing what she does best, right? Martha is serving. And it's through the Mary and Martha story in Luke that we can better understand what's going on here. Now, if you remember the Mary-Martha story in Luke, you recognize that Martha is so caught up in the serving that she is ignoring the most important thing, and that is spending time with Jesus and developing her relationship with Him, while Mary is simply sitting at the feet of Jesus, taking in all that she can. And from that passage, we see the misplaced priorities of Martha in that she is just given everything she can towards serving, but she's neglecting the most important part. Now you might think, okay, so Martha just needs to stop serving. She's serving way too much. She just needs to stop. Well, if we look at this passage here, what is she doing? She is still serving. Does that mean she's sinning? Absolutely not. Part of being a believer, part of being a Christian is serving. So it's not that you need to stop serving, it's that you need to put serving in its proper place of priority in your walk with Christ. So we see here that Martha, she has gone through this training school of Jesus. She has grown. We know she's grown because in the previous chapter, we see her amazing faith shining through even while her brother is dead, and she feels that Jesus has abandoned her. And we know that she then places her faith in Jesus, recognizing who He is as the Messiah. So when we see her serving here, we need to assume that she is actually serving in obedience to God and she's doing it in the right way. Because serving is necessary. So we see here that Martha is serving, and we can get a better idea of how she's serving because of her history and her growth, her spiritual growth that we have seen already. So though she is serving, she is not making busy work the main thing. She's not trying to perfect every little thing in the feast because, of course, that would be an overemphasis on that instead of on Jesus Christ. Now, sometimes people might like to justify spiritual laziness or non-attention to detail over Martha's overzealous service in the book of Luke. In Luke 10, again, she put those details of service over her relationship with Jesus. However, again, she's still serving because service is necessary. Attention to detail is necessary. Working hard in serving others is necessary. But again, must not overshadow our worship of and our relationship with Christ. In fact, I will say this, for many Christians, the takeaway should probably be that they need to serve more, not less. Instead, they need to cast off, and again, I'm not saying this to everyone here, and maybe very few, if any, here, but for many people, there is a spiritual laziness that needs to stop. There is a spiritual complacency of, well, just let the other person do it. They're going to do it better than I will, so I'm not even going to try. And they need to cast off that self-centeredness and have a greater heart of love for others. If you truly love others, you're going to serve others the best you can. Martha clearly had a gift of serving, didn't she? Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have been doing it all the time. She probably enjoyed it. And here she was using her gift appropriately. The next thing we see in this passage is that Lazarus is alive. He is alive, and he is at the feast. Now, this is, to me, one of the most heartwarming parts of this story. You just think about all that emotional trauma that happened in chapter 11. You know, Lazarus has been dead, and Mary and Martha thought Jesus abandoned them, and the disciples thought that didn't know what was going on, and you had all the weeping and the wailing, and then in the midst of that deep, deep, deep sorrow, you have a miracle happen that no one expected, and now he's still alive. And they can enjoy his presence once again. Now, we all know that Lazarus died again, didn't he? He's not still alive physically. He died again. But at this point, he was able to enjoy more years, at least, on earth with his family, with his Christian brothers and sisters. So this warms my heart here. He's in his normal self. Although the passage does not say this, I think we can assume that he's not some sort of half-alive zombie there and completely just, zoned out. He's bodily alive, but not mentally or emotionally there. No, a real person. He is alive as he was before he died, maybe even more alive. And his presence made the celebration and the serving so much more meaningful. I mean, again, just think, there's Martha. Picture her putting down a plate of food in front of her brother Lazarus, who still would be dead if it weren't for Jesus. There she has more days, more months, more years that she can spend with her brother because of what Jesus has done. So just an amazing testament to the powerful resurrection work of Christ, and again, pointing to how Jesus would one day, in just a few days, be resurrected from the dead himself by the power of the Spirit. So this, again, was a testament to the powerful service of Jesus Christ. Martha was serving, Jesus served in an amazing way, and now we're going to see the most central act of service in this story. We could also call this next part of the story the hinge that the whole story turns on, and it is the most striking element of this story as well, although later on in the story there is another striking element, but I would say this is the most striking that surprised the most people. And it has to do with Mary. What does Mary do? Mary is the relationship-oriented of the two sisters, right? Serving might, in the way that Martha served, was probably not her gift. But we still see that she served in a way that was unique to her. What does she do? She takes a bottle of perfume that may have been worth, in our current money, something like $30,000 or $40,000. Again, we don't know for sure, but Judas later said we could have sold this for 300 denarii. A denarius was one day's wage. If you count in feast days and not, Sabbaths and so forth, this is close to a year's worth of salary. So, for some people, a year might be $25,000. For other people, a year might be $250,000. All right, if you take a median income, I'm just going to say $30,000, $40,000 or something like that. So let's say that this bottle of perfume was worth a year's wage, $30,000 to $40,000. So what does Mary do with this bottle of perfume? Now, this bottle of perfume did not have the nice spray cap on top, right? Where you just, spray, 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 and it lasts for, a month or more, depending how you use it. No, they did not have those nice spray buttons on their perfume bottles. Instead, it was a completely sealed jar made out of clay. So it didn't have a nice twist cap on it either. All right, it was all sealed up. There was no way to easily open it. The only way you could open it was to do what? You had to break it. You had to break open the neck of the bottle so that you could then pour out its contents. So when you broke that open, all right, you were basically ready to use all of it for the most part. Now, you could probably pour it into a jar and keep it, later and so forth, or try to reseal it. But we see here that Mary was going to now use her $30,000 bottle of perfume. What was she going to do with it? Was she going to splash it on herself to make herself more presentable? Was she going to give some to her sister, to her brother, to some other guests? What was she going to do with this $30,000 bottle of perfume? Look with me again at verse 3. Mary therefore took a pound, so pretty good amount, pretty large bottle of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus. I'm going to stop there for a second. Now, I think it's safe to say that no one in that room had probably ever seen anything like this before. They're probably thinking, I care about Jesus and all, but $30,000 to pour it on his feet? Isn't that a little extreme? No one there had probably experienced such an intense perfume smell before either. All right, and how many people in that room, there may have been one or two, but how many people could afford to buy $30,000 worth of perfume? And it's likely, it's not certain, but it's likely that Mary probably went out and bought that specifically for this occasion. So as John writes, also the house was filled up with the smell of the perfume. So it says here in verse 3, she anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now I think John mentions that again. That's a very important detail. Everyone was aware of what had just happened. All right, this is very clear to everyone. It could not be ignored. And I think this comment was to show that no one had an excuse for not thinking about Jesus' coming death, because this perfume was specifically linked to the burial of Jesus, as we see here. And we'll see that later in the story. We won't actually look at that today because of time constraints. But we see here that she spilled this perfume, maybe not all of it, but she was ready to probably sacrifice all of it at that time or in the next coming days when Jesus was buried. So not only does Mary break open the bottle, she splashes the perfume on Jesus' feet. Now, how many of you put perfume on your feet? Unless you really have smelly feet, maybe you do. But I haven't heard that that's really a thing. Maybe it is for some people. But honestly, whenever you find out how to use cologne or perfume, you're supposed to just spritz some in the air and walk through it, and that should be enough for the day. All right, that's how you're supposed to use it. Now, that's not what Mary did. Not even close. She didn't put it on. Now, we know that she put it on Jesus' head from the Matthew passage. In a way, probably anointed his whole body with that perfume. But in John, he just focuses on the feet. And the feet would have been the dirtiest part of the person because everyone wore sandals. And they had no paved roads through these villages often. Maybe in the city there was some pavement, some stones, but to travel in Bethany, pretty sure there probably weren't many paved roads. So you have all this dirt and dust, and if it just rained, mud, sewage would sometimes be out in the streets, depending on the situation. It's not entirely sure, but very nasty to walk around normally in that day and time. So your feet were filthy. Normally you just use water. So Mary pours this $30,000 worth of perfume, maybe not all of it again, but let's safely say she spent $1,000 on Jesus' feet. All right, just splashing that perfume on his feet. And it must have been a lot because his feet then needed to be dried. If you're just doing a tiny bit, you probably don't need to dry it. But if you're going to dry it, it's probably because you put a lot on there. So Mary then, what does she do? Does she find a towel? Does she use the skirt part of her robe? Does she maybe use a headcloth that she's wearing to dry Jesus' feet? No, she doesn't do any of that. She uses her hair to dry the feet of Jesus. Anyone here ever used your hair to dry someone else's feet? All right, so it's probably not happened. It probably won't happen, right? You're probably going to use a towel because a towel will probably work a whole lot better. Anyway, but this shows Mary's complete love and devotion to Jesus, especially realizing what was going to happen to him in the next few days. Mary then finishes her act of supreme service to God, of Jesus, and worship to Jesus by drying his feet with her hair. Now, everything that Mary did probably had never been done before by anyone. Maybe for a king or for an emperor somewhere, in Rome or wherever. But that type of thing did not happen. And you look through every single thing that she did at this point. All right, you can take just about any one of those little things. It probably never happened or hardly ever happens. Mary did all of them because of her devotion to Jesus. That was the way she served Jesus in this moment. She loved Christ so much that, and get this, she had no limits for how she would serve her Savior. All right, we all have limits, don't we? And we might not say we do. We say, I have decided to follow Jesus. All that is mine is Jesus's, and I'll do whatever, sacrifice my life for him. And we sing those things, and I believe that part of our hearts really believe that. But when it comes right down to it, we do impose limits, don't we? Now, sometimes we have to because of physical concerns, because we're sick, or just complete exhaustion, ministry burnout, things like that. But often that's not the case. We just put limits because we don't really care that much. It's not that important to us. So she had no limits for how she would serve her Savior. And what a rebuke this should be to us. And what an example of how we should reevaluate what we are willing to do for Jesus and what we are unwilling to do for Jesus. What are you willing to do for Jesus? Are you willing to sacrifice $30,000 if God called you to do that, to worship him and serve him? Or do you have a limit? Is that above your limit? Now, Christianity means serving Christ sacrificially. And as I said, we're not going to look at the whole passage today, but just to give a preview, the next time we come together and I have the privilege of preaching, we'll then see that Christianity means honoring Christ, despite the temptation to be selfish. Of course, that's looking at Judas. And the final thing, Christianity means living out your faith so that others will turn to Jesus. And the main idea from this passage is that Christianity is all about Jesus Christ, who he is and what he's accomplished. We can easily make Christianity about serving, just for serving's sake. We can make Christianity about fellowship, for fellowship's sake. We can make Christianity about networking, so that we can do better in our employment, in our social standing. There are many things that people make Christianity all about. It could be about just helping the poor. And while Christianity can include many of these things, there are many more as well that aren't bad, we can tend to watered down Christianity to where it becomes these things rather than Jesus Christ himself, and worshiping him as the main thing, serving him as the main thing. Christianity is all about Jesus Christ, who he is, and what he has accomplished.